What's up everybody? Today I'm going to be talking about my recent trip to Madeira, a place that most people probably know for the wine, but for photographers and anybody who is an outdoor enthusiast, there are plenty of opportunities to be found there, hiking, landscapes. It's a sort of volcanic island, very Hawaii-like in appearance, but a little bit more forested, and some aspects that are not exactly tropical. They call it subtropical apparently. It's located probably more off the coast of Africa than of Europe, and in this guide I'm going to be covering logistics, how to get there, how to get around, driving, all that, lodging, where to stay, places to eat. It's pretty cheap compared to a lot of places you'll go to in Europe, so that's a good thing. And then of course the locations as it pertains to photography. What are these amazing locations that I visited, when to get there, how to get there, and just different photographic advice for visiting these locations. So let's dive right in. So as mentioned, how to get to Madeira, which is a tiny little island in the Atlantic Ocean. You're gonna fly into Lisbon, the capital of Portugal, and from there it's a 2-hour flight to Madeira. There's a couple of different airlines that fly out there, and so you just kind of pick what works with your budget and your scheduling and all that. But you're gonna fly into the capital, Funchal, depending on how you wanna say it, and that is the biggest city on the island. As a base camp, because of the layout of these locations, I would recommend basing out of Funchal for part of your trip, and then there is a small town to the northwest called Porto Moniz, which is close to another bunch of locations up in that area, and that would probably be another good area to base out of. In general, the way the island is geographically laid out, the northwest side is a little bit more lush, they get more rain, and then on the south, where the main city of Funchal is, southeast, it's a little bit drier, and especially when you get to Ponta De Sao Lourenco, that's pretty much desert landscape as it gets. Very beautiful though. But that's kind of how geographically the country is laid out. As far as where to stay in Madeira, there are hostels and such places that I usually stay at, but the Airbnbs are so crazy cheap there. Probably starts around 20 bucks and goes higher depending on if it's high season or low season. But the average price of most of my Airbnbs is around 20, 25 bucks. And it's just very budget friendly and very nice hostel-like Airbnbs, and then obviously more exclusive stuff if that's your preference. Now, driving in Madeira, I have a lot to say about this because if you are familiar with driving in Europe, you know, you're used to these little tiny roads. You know, the car that you rent when you're there is going to be a tiny little car, and so you can navigate these roads pretty well if you kind of know how to deal with the European style of the way things are laid out. It's a very mountainous country, so there's some crazy steep roads going up, going down, so all the cars are manual, and you should be familiar with how to drive a manual vehicle on very steep mountains. I believe there might be automatic cars if you pay for a higher tier or something, but what I got was a manual car, and you know, I'm familiar with driving manual, so it wasn't that big of a deal for me. Additionally, there was a strange tendency of these people to drive. Well, obviously they're from Madeira, so they know the layout way better than I do, and you know, I'd be looking at the GPS map and all that, but they were constantly tailgating me. It was almost like a joke. Anywhere where you at, you know, you're driving somewhere, not exactly going slow, but at speed limit. It seems like a lot of people go above speed limit, but driving at speed limit, constantly being tailgated on these tiny roads, and these people are in a very extreme sense of urgency to pass you. So just be aware that it's not something that I read or noticed mentioned anywhere, but I definitely noticed that there was a lot of tailgaters, and these people are in a hurry to get to wherever they want to get to apparently. So be aware of that. And then also another nice little side note, when you're using your GPS, because you don't know the area, you're going to be going through many tunnels. As this is a mountainous country, there are many tunnels to pass through, and every time you pass through a tunnel, you lose your GPS signal, and your route is going to reset. And if you have an exit that is pretty soon after a tunnel, and this happened to me many times at the beginning until I sort of got the hang of it, I would lose signal, miss my exit, have to get off later, turn around, and come back around because there's, like I said, many tunnels, and it's just another one of those weird quirks of driving in Madeira. As far as eating there, you know, I did my usual thing of going to the supermarket and cooking my own food, but to be honest, everything is just so ridiculously cheap there. You can get some decent snacks, decent meals for very little money. You know, for $7 you get a nice, their typical food tends to be this round bread with a steak sandwich kind of deal. They have a lot of seafood there, very weird, strange fish that are only particular to that region or that country. And then even if you get to the fancier restaurants, on the last night we went to a kind of fancy restaurant, nice big steak and... Salad? No. Salad, yeah. Salad. You know, the usual wine and all that stuff, and it really only came out to $50 for 2 people. So for $25 per person for a fancy meal, you can imagine what everything else is going to be priced at. Now let's go ahead and get into the fun stuff, the locations. A little preface here. The names are obviously all in Portuguese. A little bit hard to pronounce because they have extra I's added, C's with the little thing on the bottom, like the French style. I don't know what they're called, and just strange ways of laying out the words. So I'm going to pronounce them as well as I can. So to begin, let's start with one of the closest spots to Funchal. It's called Ponta De Sao Lourenco. It's about 30 minutes from Funchal, and it is one of those drier desert kind of landscapes, as I mentioned. When you get there, there's going to be pretty much no trees, and it's going to be a drastic change even from Funchal. And it is the peninsula to the east of the island, the easternmost point of the island. There's actually 2 locations here, but let me get into the main one. When you drive into, there's going to be a parking lot, and there's going to be a main hiking trail, and then that kind of splits off into multiple hiking trails. From here, there are plenty of points of view, so you can visit this for sunrise or sunset, and you just kind of find the angle that works, which direction you're facing. The light, the way it hits the cliffs, you know, could be pleasant in one direction or the other. You can climb one point and get a view all the way down the peninsula, which makes for a very nice composition, nice shot. And I very much enjoyed this location. I visited multiple times. I did a lot of awesome drone stuff here with the new FPV drone. And of course, that all came together in my final video. But great for drone stuff, great for photography, great for hiking. The other location that I want to mention is called Ponta De Rosto. It's a little bit to the north of the parking lot of the main Ponta De Sao Lourenco viewpoint. There's going to be a little fork in the road beforehand, but you basically get more of a north-northwestern view at this location as opposed to south-southwestern, southeastern view at the other main parking lot. So just kind of see what works for the time of year that you visit. As I mentioned, use Google Earth to kind of figure out the angle of the sun and see what makes sense, but you can make this a sunrise or a sunset location. About 20 minutes from Funchal is the Cristo Rei viewpoint. It's very similar to what you'll see in Brazil, the giant statue of Jesus, and I believe in Lisbon there's also a similar one, but a lot bigger. So the one that's in Madeira is a little bit smaller than both of those. I didn't actually shoot here, I didn't have time, but I saw it plenty of times. I went diving and the boat kind of went by the front of the cliff where it was located. Seems like it could have made a good spot for drone flying as well, and I believe it faces both east and west, so you can visit this place for sunrise or sunset. Now, one of my top favorite locations on Madeira is Pico Do Arieiro. It is what gives it the iconic, I don't know, a lot of the shots that you'll see from Madeira are these above the clouds, you know, these trails that go off in these steep cliffs and the clouds under you or clouds passing through the trail where you're hiking. But Pico Do Arieiro is a very popular, very awesome location. I visited at least 2 to 3 times, different times of the day. It can be shot for sunrise or sunset. You just kind of have to figure out where the sun's going to be at that particular point. You can just park in the parking lot and there's a couple of views from there. You can hike down to where there is an antenna tower, and I actually shot sunrise here, but in hindsight, I should have probably hiked down the trail in the opposite direction. So on that note, definitely come and visit during the day to kind of figure out where you're going to set up for whether you're shooting sunrise or sunset, because I shot both here and I could have probably gotten a better sunrise shot if I was further down the trail, because I was basically shooting straight into the clouds. It was very windy, and also I should add that it gets very cold in the morning. I believe it was around 20, 25 degrees, maybe 30, maybe I'm exaggerating, but I was definitely underprepared. Even though I knew it was going to be a little bit cold, I didn't realize how cold it was going to be. Add the winds and the clouds, the wet clouds blowing into my camera, which I was constantly wiping as I was shooting. But keep that in mind. You bring some gloves or something. I didn't have any gloves at all, so my hands were completely frozen. But you can shoot pretty easy locations here to shoot sunrise and sunset. And then there's a couple of hikes that lead from here. So let me go ahead and get to my next location, which is Pico Ruivo, which is probably the most famous hike. It's a hike that actually has 2 locations that you can start from. The first one is obviously from the parking lot of Pico Do Arieiro, and the hike from there is quite intense. A friend of mine, she did it during the day. It took her like 6 hours. There's a lot of people there hiking, so it's not that that difficult or scary. You know, you can stop at whatever point. I did it actually at night with another friend because my goal was to shoot astrophotography, and I didn't realize that this hike actually starts at very high altitude, goes down into a valley, through some caves that are pretty cool, and then only towards the end you actually get back up to a point where you could see the Milky Way, as I realized when I did the hike. And luckily we did it at night and it was a little bit colder, because when you're hiking up and down these steep stairs, you know, you start to heat up, even though it is kind of cold when you're up in the mountains. But it is a very intense hike, and 6 hours round trip. I believe it's 7 miles each direction. So definitely be prepared, bring enough water, you know, do your research, you know, get there early enough if you're trying to be there for sunset or for sunrise or a certain time, and just don't attempt this hike underprepared. So the second starting point to get to Pico Ruivo, while the main Pico Do Arieiro is only 30 minutes about from Funchal, since this is located a little bit more on the north side of the island, it's about an hour and 30 minutes because you have to go all the way around. It's kind of complicated the way the island is set up, but it's going to take you a little bit longer. You could also go from Porto Moniz, but for this shorter hike path, you go to the Achada do Teixeira parking lot, and from there I believe it is a 1.2 mile hike to reach the same viewpoint, Pico Ruivo. So two very awesome locations, make for great photography and especially drone flying. Some of the more epic drone shots that I got were in this location. Time lapse is pretty awesome too, because yeah, at different times of the day you have the clouds at different elevations. Sometimes they're just completely obscuring you and sometimes they're right below you. So I would recommend visiting this location multiple times and just making the most of it. And as I mentioned, you can shoot astrophotography here. Not exactly from the parking lot of Pico do Arieiro. You have to make the Pico Ruivo hike at night. But of course, as I mentioned, which I didn't do, you can take the shorter version and not have to do the crazy hike that I did at the middle of the night. About 30 minutes from Funchal, on the northeast part of the island, there is a location called the Crane Viewpoint, or in Portuguese, it's something like Miradoura do Guindaste. Excuse my pronunciation. It's a sort of cliff viewpoint where it has an interesting setup where there's a main point where you can shoot from and a small trail that leads to another little outcropping. And usually what people do is they'll set their camera up and then they'll hike down to this little outcropping, and you kind of sort of get a leading line with the trail, and there's a giant cliff in the background, ocean below you. And if you come here at sunrise, you'll have the nice light coming in, which when I visited for sunrise, it was a cloudy sunrise. There was a little bit of light in the color at the beginning, but then it quickly got obscured. So it wasn't the best sunrise to visit. I just shot what I had to shoot there. Great for drone flying, kind of around the coast as well. I also sent my drone off to the cliffs, very distant cliffs, and I got cool shots on one of the sides, and the other side I just started losing too much signal and didn't really get anything good there. Now, an iconic feature of Madeira are these things called Levadas, which are basically sort of aqueducts that run from the mountains, and I believe they run all the way down into the towns. And a lot of the hikes that you'll do are along these Levadas. So the hikes will be named Levada this, Levada that, and it's a pretty cool looking feature. And you hike along, I don't know if you can actually drink the water straight from it, but you hike along these water aqueducts. And so the location I want to get into now is called Levada do Caldeirao Verde. It is a waterfall hike. It's about 3 miles each direction, but there's literally no elevation gain, so it's pretty easy. It just takes a little bit of time. You start in a parking lot. It's very popular, so I'd recommend visiting during the early hours or maybe late hours if you want to hike at night. But there's a lot of people. It's very popular, and there's small waterfalls that you'll see along the way. And almost one of my favorite shots from this hike was a smaller waterfall on the way there rather than the giant waterfall at the end, because when a waterfall is too large and too skinny, it's kind of hard to get a good composition of it. I tried, but I like the previous two waterfalls that were on the way there. The shots that I got there better. But it's a pleasant hike through the forest, you know, not too hot. There's some views out into the valley if you want to put the drone up and get some stuff there. I used some of that footage for the beginning of my travel film. But overall, pretty pleasant hike and only about 46 minutes drive from Funchal. So Porto Moniz is probably the second biggest town / city on the island. They're all pretty small. As you're making your drive around the island, you'll see these cute little towns and you wonder how can anybody live there. There were some crazy houses like on just little individual rocky peaks and just all kinds of crazy geographical setups, but I'm sure people are used to living that way. But anyways, Porto Moniz is on the northwest part of the island, as I mentioned, and there is a series of sort of natural pools that have sort of been changed into not so natural pools. So I actually visited there to try to see if I could shoot something or if there was anything to shoot for sunrise. But the vibe I got from there was very amusement parkish. So as I was eyeing compositions, I decided not to shoot there because it seemed just too set up and too touristy. I'm sure if you visit during the day, there's going to be people everywhere. So if you do want to shoot there, I would shoot there in the morning. And Porto Moniz is about 52 minutes from Funchal. So definitely not a drive you want to make it regularly. So that's why I would recommend if you go to kind of just base out of there. And it's there should be plenty of Airbnb options to stay at. So I didn't actually stay in the town of Porto Moniz, but about 10 minutes from there is another smaller town called Ribeira Da Janela, which is also the name of this rock formation, or maybe it's just the name of the location, right there by the beach. And it is very Icelandic in appearance, give me a lot of Icelandic vibes, rocky beach, strange sea stack formation, sort of, I believe there's like 3 or 5 of them, and they're like these pyramid shaped and make for great focal point for your shots. You can shoot nice and low, get some long exposures. The water as it's leaving or it's washing up on the shore. The tide will probably affect your compositions, but it's a pretty cool location and only 10 minutes from Porto Moniz. Great sunrise location. I got some awesome stuff here, drone and regular photos, and also a couple time lapses. In general, the vibes that you'll pick up on the north coast of the island are these very Hawaii-like locations. It's very steep cliffs straight into the ocean. A couple small rocky beaches, but really not a lot of beaches there. Along this coast, you'll find the town of Seixal, another tiny town, which has its own series of natural pools similar to what you'll find in Porto Moniz. I didn't actually go swimming in these pools, neither the ones in Porto Moniz, but they made for some great foreground elements for a sunrise shoot. So I would visit this, as I just mentioned, as a sunrise location. You can either shoot from, there's a parking lot and a small platform. You can walk down, actually climb down into these rocky, I think it's a basalt type rock, rocky tide pool areas, and kind of look for compositions there. Your leading lines with the rocks, sunrise right there in front of you, and there's some other rocks that are in the ocean. Seixal is about 12 minutes from Porto Moniz, or you're going to run into it on your way if you're coming from Funchal. Overall, very photogenic location. I actually skipped it the first time I was in Porto Moniz. I stayed in Porto Moniz a couple of times because I didn't really think there was going to be a lot of potential there. But even though the sunrise was kind of hazy, we had some nice pastel colors, and I really liked the shots that I got at this location. Flew my drone here, flew around the cliffs and around the coastline. Very nice rocky coastline, so also makes for good drone footage. Very close by to Seixal is Bridal Veil Falls. It's actually a waterfall that you can't really access, but you'll see it from a parking lot as you look at down the coastline to the east. It's a little difficult to shoot, and it's actually the location where I lost one of my drones, my long-range FPV drones, because I was flying up from the mountains, doing a dive, and I wanted to get a flying down a waterfall shot. And unfortunately, I did it the first time successfully, and I thought I could get a little closer, so I flew back up and thought I could do it one more time, and at some point I lost signal. My GPS switch on my FPV drone just didn't work. It never returned, or the signal never came back, the visual signal, so I lost the drone there. But I would recommend it more for a safer drone, one of the DJI drones. You can probably get a cool top-down shot at the water, and it's right there along the cliff. About 22 minutes from Porto Moniz, or literally 5 minutes from where I was staying in Ribeira Da Janela, is my second favorite location called Fanal. Fanal is a forest which changes very constantly. It's a forest of these very eerie trees. So you might visit on one day where it's just crazy foggy. The first time that I visited there, we had maybe like 20 feet of visibility in front of us. We actually had to drop a GPS pinpoint and at the parking lot to find our way back, because there's literally no points of reference if you're walking in the middle of this very thick fog. If you visit while it is foggy, as I just mentioned, you will get these awesome moody kind of shots, kind of horror movie like. If you stand under the tree, you know, there's different kind of things you could do, because these trees, they have something about them that they're very human-like, and they're almost like, your imagination might run away with you, but they almost look like people, you know, in different poses, you know, people crying out in pain, or there's some trees that are sort of connected to each other. They're curving in all kinds of crazy directions. So there is a lot of opportunity for compositions here. Definitely one of my favorite spots, if not my favorite spot in all of Madeira. And so as it can be foggy, you can also visit on a random day, and the level of clouds is below this mountain peak because it's up in the mountains, and you can actually have a great sunrise or sunset there, or as I visited also for astrophotography. So I got lucky that I got to see the two extreme sides of Fanal, the extremely foggy side, and then the very clear, beautiful sunset and astrophotography side of it. You can make all kinds of awesome compositions there using a tree to sort of outline your photo, having your focal point in the distance. There's some cliche shots people do with the tree that kind of reaches down and the person reaching up. And if you Google Fanal, you'll find some of these photos. Go ahead and do those if you want. But there are just so many opportunities here, and it's just not that big of a forest, but it's just laid out in a way that you just kind of let your creativity run away with you, and you can get some really cool shots here. When you shoot astrophotography, however, I believe it's the light pollution, but it's a very strange looking light pollution all over the horizon where it's an orange glow, and it'll make your photos almost look like you're compositing a sunset and an astrophotography shot all together. But it's weird because, as light pollution is, it doesn't show up when you look at it visually. It only shows up in your camera, but it does make for an interesting look to your astrophotography. So about 30 minutes from Porto Moniz, and actually up the road from the Fanal forest that I just mentioned, you'll find a couple of hikes. It's one hike that splits. It's called Levada do Risco and Levada das 25 Fontes, which means, I don't know what the first one means, but the second one means 25 waterfalls. Now don't make the mistake that I did. I just kind of quickly skimmed my notes, and it's not actually a trail where you encounter 25 waterfalls. The waterfall that you encounter at the end is one main one with these little sort of mini waterfall droplet kind of things coming down the sides, and that's why they call it the 25 waterfalls. Still a little tricky composition to work with. The hike itself is about 2 miles each direction. The Levada do Risco, the first waterfall, is actually a lot closer. You're gonna park in the parking lot. You're gonna hike down this trail, which actually there is a bus that operates, I believe, sometime in the morning until about 6 p.m. And it's very cheap. I think it was like €2 each direction. It'll take you, it's a sort of shuttle bus. It'll take you down to a second parking lot down there, and you'll skip the whole paved portion of the hike. And from there you can hike to the first waterfall, Levada do Risco. Probably more impressive as a waterfall. It's bigger and it's actually two-tiered. You don't actually see the second tier. I only found out because I put my drone up and did an awesome FPV drone dive, but pretty cool spot. Honestly, I would have almost just rather have done that first one and then visited another location somewhere else, because we made the other hike, the 2 mile hike to the 25 waterfalls, 25 fontes. There's some cool things you see on the way there. There's a cool little valley, a bridge, there's a Levada that goes along it. But to be honest, once you get to that final waterfall, it could also be the time of year, because from what I hear, when it's a drier season towards the summer, the waterfalls are lighter, and probably is more impressive during the wet season, which I assume is going to be in the winter. But a very tricky place to get some compositions. It's very harsh light at one point. There's dense trees behind you, so you're not really going to have a sunrise or sunset golden kind of opportunity there. So I ended up getting a composition using one of the ferns and the waterfall in the distance, and the fern was my foreground, and sort of made it work to do something, because it was quite a long hike. I believe it was 2 hours each direction, and the way getting there wasn't so bad because you're mostly downhill, but coming back it's quite tiring, and it's all pretty uphill. Not that steep, but it is uphill. This is also another very popular hike, so if you want to get there and not have a lot of people around, get there early. Small kind of trail, so you're going to be like squeezing by or waiting for other people to get by you, so just something to keep in mind. About 12 minutes from Porto Moniz, there's another cliff viewpoint, as there are many in Madeira. It's called Miradoura Ponta Da Ladeira, and it's basically a parking lot and a viewpoint. The problem with shooting here is it makes for a great sunset location as far as the view that you get, but everything is so distant, so you're gonna have to use a telephoto lens and really pick off close details of things, because there's really nothing to work in the foreground. It's just a straight drop on the cliff, which you should be careful with, because there is a main viewpoint, and you can also hike down a little closer if you want. Just take care. But very tricky to get a good photo there, because it's just either a shot of the cliff or picking off small details, and then you have the ocean right there. So I only got a couple of shots here, and I flew the drone and tried to get some stuff. But tricky spot to work with, but at least it's pretty close to Porto Moniz and sunset location if you need to fit one into your schedule. So one more thing I want to cover, the theme of my travel video was above the clouds, below the surface, because a lot of the photos and footage that I got was flying the drone and stuff from above the clouds at these locations. But I also did a lot of scuba diving, so it's quote unquote below the surface. And I must say that there is a lot of good diving locations there, but the variety of animals that you're gonna see are not really that crazy. Like, it's not like you go to Hawaii and you see some awesome different varieties of sharks and all these fish and stuff. There is obviously a lot of varieties of fish in Madeira, but it's colder water, and I wouldn't say it was just a crazy variety of animals. So I had to struggle a little bit with the footage that I was working with, but I did come across a lot of cool stuff: the eels, the cuttlefish, the giant groupers. I'd say the giant groupers are the signature element of scuba diving in Madeira. They're very friendly. Huge groupers will come up to you, very camera friendly. So if you want to get some photos and footage of that, very awesome opportunities for that. I went with a diving shop at a hotel down there in the coast near Funchal, but there's a few dive sites that you can go with in that location. But as with everything, diving there was incredibly cheap. I believe for the 6 dive package that I purchased, it came out to about $200-250. There was a little bit extra that they threw on there because of the boat fees and things that they don't really mention on the website, or maybe they do, but I didn't read them. But overall, crazy cheap. You would probably pay 2 or 3 times that to go scuba diving here in Florida or in the United States. But yeah, very cool diving experience for underwater photography and video if you're into that. That's a wrap for this guide for the beautiful island of Madeira. Definitely worth visiting. Also similar to the Canary Islands, if you're familiar with what kind of landscapes you find there. I believe it's a little bit more dry, but Madeira, it has a lot of the aspects of Hawaii. It's got the cliffs, the coastlines, a little bit drier desert areas. Awesome for FPV flying. I think it popped up in my Instagram feed randomly, and then I started doing research from there. But it's an awesome location from the Fanal forest or the above the clouds of Pico Do Arieiro. Just really awesome place to visit. And I would say that it's not as popular. You won't hear about it too much. I guess people know the name, as I mentioned, for the wine, but as a photography destination, it really hasn't popped off yet, so there's a lot of opportunities to maybe get some shots that you haven't seen out there. But highly recommend it. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more. Visit my channel for more photography tutorials, travel guides, and travel content.